Hey guys, Adam here in the Aeroworks workshop, and today it's all about engine sensors as we wire up our Viking 195 Turbo.
All right, so we're going to get started installing some of the engine sensors here. We've got basically all the Dynon temp sensors that we've got going in, gearbox, coolant, intercooler, and then we've got some of our pressure sensors in that. We're going to be installing these using Loctite 567. This is a thread sealant made for high temp applications, and they sell it in various size tubes. I actually also picked up a larger can on Amazon, although it is quite expensive. It's about 75 bucks for a larger can of it, but that should last you pretty much forever if you're building one or two planes. So, all right, let's get started.
Well, the first step in the process is to remove the brass plugs that have been inserted by Viking. They've been put in with sealer as well, so we want to take those out and clean out the sealer. Here we're putting in the temperature probe for the gearbox. I'll cover a little bit more about the sealant here in just a minute. Go ahead and get that snugged down. They don't have to be super tight, but you do want to make sure they're snugged up just right. All right, the next one we need to do is right back here behind the gearbox, and that is the coolant temperature. So this is the toughest one to get to. It's right behind there. Actually, I've got my gearbox vent line right here, which can be moved out of the way, but we'll take this one out, and we'll put the same sensor in right here. Clean off some of the old sealant. And we'll put another one in there. One other thing I want to show you too is it doesn't take much sealer on here. All you really have to do is kind of fill the threads. And you notice I didn't go all the way up because it's not going to be screwed in that far. Don't get any on your probe.
That's what she said.
But you don't need to go crazy with the sealant here because you'll see that after it starts to tighten up, it's going to be squishing all that out of there anyways. And one thing you'll notice on here too is that these sensors are a single wire sensor. So we're just going to have one wire going off of here. It uses the aircraft ground as the second wire. So we're going to go ahead and show you how we make up a connector to fit on that terminal. All right, to make up our wire for our sensor, we're going to need some, in this case I'm using some 18 gauge Tefcell wire. This is aircraft grade wire. I'm going to be using some proper strippers. These are made by Klein, and I'll just give you a little, I'll show you what they look like. Proper ones here. A lot of us have these around. You may be tempted to use these. These are really for more like low voltage wiring or even house wiring, depending on the gauge you get there. But they're not real precise, and what you tend to do with these is you put the wire in and you crimp down, and when you pull off straight, you don't tend to get the jacket off, so you end up twisting it to get it off, and then you end up gouging the wires under there, which will cause breaks and a bad connection. So these are great for house wiring, for car stuff. Don't want to use these on an airplane. Use the proper ones here. The next thing I have is just some side cutters. You can buy a whole bunch of these on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. They make a nice clean cut, real good for trimming wires, getting a nice straight edge, things like that. Get yourself a pair of these. And then lastly, a good pair of crimpers. These are the TE crimpers. You can get these on Aircraft Spruce. I'll put the link down below. The nice thing with a set of these is the jaws are replaceable. So you can put a whole bunch of different dies in there depending on what kind of job you're doing, whether you're doing coax or wiring, what have you. This particular set of jaws handles the TE type, or really any kind of ring or blade type connector like this. It's going to handle your red, your blue, and your yellow. So the most common sizes we're going to use in an aircraft. Now, one thing with these, there is actually a right and a wrong way to crimp. You'll notice that the jaws, there's different levels and shapes in here. So You could put the connector in here really either direction and just force it down, but you're not going to be crimping it the correct way. The correct way, if you're looking at these connectors from the left side or even upside down, is the wire is going to enter on the left side. So that means that your connector needs to lay in here like this, with the opening facing the left side, not the other way around. You can crimp it that way, but it's not going to be a proper fit. And in fact, if you look at that, it doesn't even really want to lay in there correctly. So what that tells you is it really needs to be in here this way. So what you want to do with your connector is just lay it in there with the opening facing out to the left. You can bring that crimp down, and you notice that the jaws will actually stay locked because they have a spring and a mechanism in there. So you want to have your connector in there flush with the face, and then we're going to simply take our 18 gauge wire. We're going to find our 18 gauge groove. We're going to put the crimper on there, the stripper on there, and we are going to pull the appropriate amount of wire off. And you can see that that gave us a nice clean strip. There we go, right there. Okay, we're then going to insert the wire again into the left side. And what we want to see here is that the jacket or the white of the wire is inside of the connector, and then we don't have too much of the wire sticking through the connector. And then we're going to simply crimp that down and let the tool do the rest of the work for us. And then what we end up with is a nice crimp on the wiring. And then on the inside, you'll notice that the jacket has been crimped down upon on the outside of the jacket. And that really makes a strong connection. One of the things that's been talked about in other videos as well, the difference between a proper aviation terminal connector and like an automotive one you might get at AutoZone, is that the aviation one, this metal continues all the way through the connector, almost right to the end. A automotive style is going to stop, the metal's going to stop here, and the remainder, about the last half of it's going to be plastic. So you really only have plastic crimping down in the wire, and that's not going to hold. The easiest way to tell is just to make sure that you have a metal connector that goes all the way to the end, because you're relying on that metal to actually crimp and grab onto the jacket as well. That's what gives you the strength for this connector not pulling off. And then the front side is where you get your connection for your electrical connection. So proper connectors, proper crimpers, and proper technique is what's going to give you a good solid connection. Now when we get over to the sensor, we're going to make a few of these wires up because they're all going to be ending up in the same place in the avionics tray. But basically what we have here, we have a single wire sensor, and what we're going to do with that basically is land that on the terminal. So we'll have our single wire sensor like this. We'll put our connector on there. We'll put our lock washer on there and our nut. And what we'll end up with here is a connection very similar to this. So with the threads being into the engine being grounded to the airframe and the negative bus, that's going to be our second wire, so our negative ground. This is our positive or our lead wire that'll go to our sensor input, and we'll have these single sensor sensors all over the aircraft. So that's kind of how that connection works. So we're going to make up some more of these cables. I think I'm making them up about 6 feet long. That's going to get me from the engine bay through the firewall into the avionics tray, and then I can trim them up and label them as needed. All right, this last engine side sensor is our oil pressure sensor. This is our first 3-wire one. And we're going to be pulling out this plug right here, and we're going to be installing that sensor right here. And then we'll figure out how to get our wires up to where they need to go. I, of course, pulled off the weatherproof connector just to make it easier to twist in there, but once we make up the cables, we'll plug that back in. All right, well, as we begin running these sensor wires here, that are going to be going to the various sensors, we're going to have to neatly route these through and combine multiple sensors into a protective shielding so that we can pass the engine and get through the firewall pass-through. Now, what you may have seen in many cases, and in fact you see here, is this split loom, is what they call it. And the automotive stuff or the high temp stuff typically has a gray stripe on it, which means it's rated for being next to the engine, it won't melt and such. A lot of the stuff you find on Amazon, even the stuff that says high temp, it's not high temp. I decided to go with something slightly different, and I've got a couple variations here. This is a fiberglass tube. You can buy it in a roll, you can buy it in different inside diameter thicknesses. They've got 1/2 inch, they've got some smaller stuff here. This one here actually is a solid tube, so you actually have to slide your wires through it and then zip tie it or shrink wrap it on the ends. This one here is actually a split. You could split it apart, or you could simply run the wires through it. But this is how I'm going to tidy up and hide and protect all of those 18 gauge sensor wires. I'm going to combine as many that are in the same location together, route those down, pick up the additional ones, and then run those into the cockpit where they'll be hitting the Dynon engine management system and the other avionics system. So just keep in mind, make sure you get the right stuff for the protection of the wires. I did get the larger one to protect like the battery cable, the starter wire, and those wires, and then I got the smaller stuff for the sensor wire. So just make sure you're getting the stuff and don't believe everything you see on Amazon. And in fact, a lot of those that say high temp, if you read the reviews and things, you'll see multiple reviews that say definitely not high temp, melted right away, and these are on, you know, auto type applications. So we don't want something catching on fire in our engine bay on an aircraft. So go with something reputable. Either get the gray stripe, get the high temp fiberglass protected shield type. This is actually rated to a higher temp than even the plastic stuff, so that's why I went with this. And then basically you just simply zip tie the end. So you'll zip tie the end off. You could even put shrink tube on there if you wanted to. It's not necessary. But it's really just to protect that between point A and point B, anything that it might touch up against. And again, we're going to have this all zip tied up and secure anyways, but just to know that the wire is protected and out of the way from chafing and from heat. All right, so a quick summary of where we're at so far. We started up here with the gearbox temperature probe. We're still going to cover this up. We'll do a little splice right here, and we'll put some more wrap on there as well as some heat tape. And then we follow that up with the coolant temp, which is right behind there, right into where the water pump area is. Both those lines go into the protective fiberglass shielding, and they're going to run along and through the firewall there. We branch off of there and drop down to the intercooler. We've got one temp probe right here. And again, we're going to tape all this up. We'll tape the Y up there nice and tight. And then we're going to pick up one more intercooler wire, temp wire right here. And we'll figure out the best way, but we'll route that up and either join it in with this one or maybe run a separate one up and join that into the firewall pass-through, which again, we're not done with the firewall pass-through. This is obviously going to get cut out a lot bigger than that. Take it over to the other side of the aircraft. We got our first pressure sensor, and that is this one right here. That is our oil pressure sensor. So we pulled out the plug right there, put in the Dynon sensor right here, and then of course we'll have the weatherproof connector, which we'll plug in here like that. And what we'll probably do from that point is maybe run those wires up, come up, we'll protect those wires as well, come up here, pick up this hose maybe, and then just follow these other lines and zip tie it all together. So that's kind of where we're at right now, guys, with the engine wiring. And we're going to get everything bundled up, installed, wrapped, and brought into the engine bay, or excuse me, the avionics bay. And then we can start working on the rest of the engine components. We'll start working on cooling, fuel lines, and the heater.
So after we get that done, we're going to be getting a lot closer to first engine start. You can also see, I mentioned it earlier in the video, but you can also see I made up a short cable here. This one is for going between the alternator and the starter. We pick up power off the starter because we're coming in with our main line here, and then we're just going to bring back power back to here so that we can charge the batteries when we turn on the alternator, which is triggered by a engine harness through the ECU. So when that wire that pops out up here gets landed on our alternator switch, when that switch is on, this will then start charging, sending power from here to here, back up the line to the power positive lead, which will then run over and charge up the batteries. So that is our charging system. We're going to keep working on all this, get everything tidied up and wrapped up and protected. And then another thing that we're also doing too, as we bring these wires in, like you see here, I've got 3/18s already in just this one small protective shield. We're obviously labeling everything up, right? So we're going to have everything, it's going to have a label on it. We're going to know what everything is, keep everything organized so that we can fan that out and go into our Dynon engine monitoring and or main harness for the Dynon. We'll be able to not have to trace anything out because everything's labeled up. So nothing here is quite tightened down yet. We're leaving everything just kind of hand tight. Like I said, we're going to put some more protection on these and this. We'll get these wrapped up. I did pick up some heat tape. I don't know where that is right now. I was going to show it to you here. But that will polish off the ends here, but it'll also make it easy to make these little wide junctions. We'll just wrap that up and wrap the ends up. That'll protect that there. So that's where we're at, guys.
All right, guys, well, I think I'm going to wrap this episode up here right now. I'm going to get back and get over there and button everything up. But I just got another box here from UPS I want to share with you. It's going to be covered in a future episode. As you know, AeroWorks and myself have been working closely with Steve over at Aircraft Specialty. Their actual shop is about 40 minutes from the AeroWorks workshop here. Steve actually did all of our panel work for us. He's doing our fuel lines for us and some other things. And so we've been working with him on something here, and let's see if this is what I think it is. But we're gonna pop this open and see what we got. Oh yeah. So what we have here is a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of AN fittings. We've got some shutoff valves. Very cool. So what we were working on is a complete fuel line system for the Super Duty, but for the Viking engine. So we had always wanted to put steel lines in the wings, but there was some complication to adapting to the way that the Viking engine fuel setup is configured with the header tank and the fittings they use. So what we were able to do is come up with a new way to do steel lines from both the wing tanks as well as the vent lines to the header tank, all the fittings, all the parts and pieces you need. And so that's what we are going to be going into in a future episode. But I can tell you that just looking at this, we've got some amazing work here. So all of our lines, these are all of our steel lines for the fuel tanks. We've got the remainder of our brake lines, again, that we were working on. So we've got our brake lines completed, some more parts and pieces for that. And let's see, and then we've got all of our new custom fuel lines and fittings and all that good stuff right here. So again, we're going to be covering all of this in a future episode, along with the parts that are provided, the valves, all the fittings you need. Looks like they provided grommets and the whole works. So it's going to be a really cool build, along with the safe build, because that's really what we want in aircraft. And when you have steel braided lines versus hard lines, rigid lines, in the event of a crash where a wing might come off, steel lines are a huge protector, and one of the leading causes in crashes and accidents and deaths is fire, obviously, in a plane crash. If you look at one of the safest aircraft built on the market today in general aviation, that is the Diamond aircraft. And if you look at their DA-20, their DA-40 on up, these are composite aircraft, but all of their aircraft have flexible steel braided type fuel lines, and that's kept them from a lot of deaths in some of the accidents that they have had, mishaps and such. So real excited to be able to utilize these in the Super Duty. Again, we're going to go over all the installation of these as we get to those parts. Hopefully some of the internal stuff will be happening very soon, because we're getting close to almost getting the preliminary parts and pieces installed to get the Viking 195 started for the first time. And once we have that header tank installed and all the fuel lines to the engine, we're going to be ready to go. We've got our wiring going in. So that's what I'm going to be wrapping up today. Again, I really appreciate everybody watching. I hope you're getting some value out of the videos. If you are, make sure you give it a like. Hopefully you're already subscribing. That's probably how you got to the video. If you're not, make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are thinking about doing some more live feeds. We did one a couple weeks back and some of you missed out on it. It was more of a trial. But what I'd like to do is kind of have some random live feeds from time to time and allow you guys to dial in, ask questions, direct me to a part of the plane you want to look at, compare it to your plane, and what have you. Comments, questions, all the above. Again, it's just about sharing the passion, sharing the aviation dream, and hopefully it helps, or maybe I learned something from somebody else as well. So again, Adam and the Aeroworks Workshop, appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you on the next video.